started with one man, Chairman Na Il-soo, the head of DM Financial Investments. A year ago, he vanished, taking a huge amount of money from his investors with him. The news was all over it. The police had no idea where he was, and some believed he'd already fled the country. They even put out an international notice for his arrest. The people he stole from were furious. They were out on the streets, demanding the police find him and bring him to justice. But far away from all the anger and protests, someone was watching that same news report from a much more comfortable place. He found the whole thing pretty funny. As a woman poured him a glass of wine, he mocked the people he'd tricked, calling them fools for ever believing him. Turns out the man enjoying his vacation was the one they were all looking for. This was Chairman Na Il-soo, living his best life with the money he stole. He took a drink, believing that smart people like him were the ones who deserved all the money. Later that night, his yacht floated alone in the middle of the ocean. Inside, Chairman Na was sleeping soundly, without a care in the world. He was completely out. But then a voice cut through the silence, telling him to wake up. His eyes shot open. A man was sitting in a chair at the end of his bed just watching him. The stranger calmly asked if the chairman was enjoying his trip, paid for with other people's money. The chairman was terrified. He demanded to know who the man was. The stranger sounded disappointed, asking if the chairman had already forgotten his voice. The chairman's eyes widened. He knew that voice. The chairman stammered out the name in disbelief, Director Kim Mahyuk. Mahyuk calmly stated his purpose. He was there to collect the debt Chairman Na owed to Thyssen Capital. The chairman started to panic, trying to find the right words to talk his way out of it. Realizing talking wasn't going to work, he screamed for his security guards. But his guards were already on the floor, completely unconscious. They'd been dealt with before Mahyuk even entered the room. Mahyuk leaned in and told him to calm down. He wasn't there to take him back to Korea. Mahyuk just smiled and said they were only there to take back their money. He then showed the chairman his phone, which laid out the full debt. With the principal and the massive annual interest, the total came to over 470 billion won. The chairman's eyes went wide. He couldn't believe the number. Mahyuk calmly converted the amount to dollars for him, even offering to round it down to 350 million as a small favor. That's when the chairman started to panic, claiming he had no money left after buying the yacht. He started yelling that the interest was double the original amount and called them thieves. Finally, he just threw his hands up in defeat, telling Mahyuk to just take the yacht if he wanted something. Mahyuk just stood there, listening to the whole pathetic display without saying a word. The yacht was floating alone in the middle of the dark ocean. Suddenly, the anchor chains started to move. On the deck, Mahyuk and one of his men stood under the moonlight. He took a drag from his cigarette, completely unfazed by the chairman's earlier outburst. Then, with a simple flick of his wrist, he gave the order to pull him up. The heavy chains started rising out of the water. Turns out the chairman wasn't on the yacht anymore. He was tied to the anchor, soaking wet and struggling for his life. He gasped for air, shivering from the cold and the fear. The time for talking was over. Mahyuk, sitting calmly with a laptop, started listing off the chairman's hidden accounts. He knew about the shell company in Malta and another in the Virgin Islands. He knew exactly how much money was stolen. The chairman started panicking, screaming that he didn't have any money. He swore that the yacht was the only thing he had left. But Mahyuk wasn't buying it. He calmly added the 120 million in a Swiss bank account to the list. Altogether, the chairman owed 470 billion won. He told the chairman he could transfer the money immediately. The yacht's satellite internet was more than fast enough. The chairman was horrified. He stammered that he couldn't give up the money, that he needed it all back. Mahyuk's expression was cold. He reminded the chairman that the money wouldn't do him any good if he ended up as food for the sharks. But the chairman was completely obsessed. He screamed that he would rather die than live without his money. That's when he finally broke. He yelled that he would deposit the principal amount, 150 billion won, right now. The chairman tried to bargain, pleading that they should forget the interest. He argued that with what he'd already paid, they'd still make a profit just by getting the main amount back. He screamed that all the other investors had already given up on the money. But Mahyuk just sat there, completely unmoved by his begging. Mahyuk didn't even bother to answer. He'd heard enough. He calmly told his man Sangi to throw the chairman back into the ocean. The men immediately grabbed him. As they dragged him to the edge, the chairman screamed that if he died, they'd never find the rest of the money. But Mahyuk didn't even flinch. He told the chairman that even if they couldn't find the money, it didn't matter. Someone who stole from Thyssen Capital had to be dealt with. A cold smile spread across his face. This was about making an example of him, so everyone would know what happens if you cross them. Mahyuk just raised his hand. That was the signal. The chairman screamed for Mahyuk to wait as they lowered him over the side of the boat, chained to a heavy anchor. A moment later, there was a splash, and then silence. Turns out it was all a bluff. The chairman was pulled back onto the boat, dripping wet and terrified. Mahyuk stood over him as he stared at a laptop, ready to do whatever he was told. He got a confirmation call. The money had been deposited without any issues. With the money secured, Mahyuk and his men bowed politely to the chairman. They thanked him for using Thyssen Capital. The chairman was furious. He couldn't believe they had just taken everything from him. Mahyuk just smiled. He told the chairman to call them again if he ever needed their help. With the job finished, Mahyuk and his men sped away, leaving the chairman behind on his yacht. The chairman watched them go, shouting out into the night. Suddenly, a bright spotlight cut through the darkness and landed right on him. He flinched, shielding his eyes as he tried to see who was there. It wasn't just one boat. A whole fleet from the Philippines Coast Guard had surrounded his yacht. They announced that he was on an Interpol red notice and was being arrested at the request of the Korean police. The chairman's face twisted with rage. He finally understood Mahyak hadn't just robbed him, he'd set him up to be caught. He was completely surrounded, there was no way out. Far away from the drama at sea, all was quiet at a large estate. The inside of the estate was just as impressive as the outside. It was huge, with a grand staircase that looked like it belonged in a palace. Hanging on the wall was a portrait of a stern-looking old man. You could just tell he was the one in charge of everything. Inside a private room, 4 men were gathered. One of them sat alone, clearly the most important person there. The man was Chinsuman, the chairman of Tisan Capital. He held out a bottle and told Mahyak to have a drink, saying he did a good job. Mahyak took the glass but stayed humble. He told the chairman that he was just following instructions and company rules. But the chairman was clearly impressed. He praised Mahyak for managing to find a man who was hiding out on a yacht and for getting all the interest back too. The vice chairman Chinsadhin agreed. He pointed out that thanks to Mahyak, the company avoided a huge loss since billions of won were on the line. But sitting off to the side was Chinsuman's eldest son, Chin Jiwon. He just watched the whole thing quietly without saying a word. The chairman leaned in, telling Mahyak he'd done a great job. He said that at this point, Mahyak was the only person they could truly trust. But Mahyak didn't take the bait. He just calmly replied that he was only doing his job. The chairman's smile widened. He insisted that when it was just them, Mahyak should call them uncle because they were all family. The vice chairman Chinsadhin jumped in with a loud laugh. He reminded everyone that Mahyak was his lovely sister's only son. The chairman held up his glass, getting to the real point. He reminded Mahyak that everyone in that room had the blood of his father, Chin Tisan. He looked around the room, making it clear that their shared blood meant they were all family. Mahyak didn't say a word, he just listened, taking it all. His mind was on one person, his maternal grandfather Chin Tisan, the legend of the Myeongdong loan shark industry. Mahyak thought back to his grandfather's reputation. In the past, even the richest and most powerful people in the country had to bow their heads to him just to borrow money. He was the undisputed king of South Korea's loan shark industry, controlling the flow of money from the shadows. His grandfather controlled a massive fortune, cash, stocks, real estate, worth trillions. But in his first life, Mahyak, his own grandson, didn't get a single penny. Instead, all of it went to his grandfather's legitimate children, Mahyak's uncles and their own kids. And now, back in the present, Mahyak was sitting right across from them. The chairman, Chinsuman, suddenly turned to his son, Jiwon. He asked why he hadn't been to the company lately, pointing out how hard Mahyak was working. He then pressed him about a specific failure, finding a CEO who had run off with a ton of construction money. Jiwon stammered weakly, claiming he'd find him soon. It was a pathetic answer and everyone in the room knew it. The uncle Suman finally snapped. He screamed at his son, calling him an idiot and accusing him of failing his mission because he was on drugs. This was Chin Jiwon, Suman's only son. He was the eldest of all the children in the Chin family. But Mahyak saw him for what he really was. An incompetent, greedy man who'd been given everything his whole life. Suman sighed, looking completely defeated. He admitted how pathetic the situation was, especially with Mahyak watching. Then he turned to Mahyak, his tone changing completely. He praised him for his hard work and told him to go get some rest. Mahyak simply bowed his head, thanked his uncle, and said he would be on his way. He walked out of the mansion and into the night. As he left, he could hear sounds of laughter coming from the house. A small, satisfied smile crossed his face. He remembered his past life, how he'd tried so hard to be recognized as a member of the family. He did every odd job they asked, no matter how dirty, but it was never enough. He was always an outsider. The car sped down the road. He was putting the mansion far behind him, but his mind was somewhere else completely. He glanced at his phone and saw a reminder. It was for his grandmother's ancestral right. He thought about her. After his parents passed away, she was the only family he really had. He remembered her taking care of him when he was just a little kid. He thought back to the simple moments, like when she'd give him a yogurt drink just to see him smile. He remembered that today marked 30 years since she had passed away. He'd bought a few things she would have liked. With a quiet goodbye in his heart, he left the store. Just then, his phone started ringing. He answered it. It was Sangi. Sangi had news. They'd found the CEO of Jinyeon Construction, and the chairman had given an order to catch him immediately. Apparently, the job was supposed to go to someone else named Jiwon, but the chairman insisted that Mahyak handle it personally. Mahyak was surprised. The chairman had asked for him by name. He told Sangi he was on his way. The bag for his grandmother would have to wait. The meeting spot was at the docks, late at night. Mahyak got out of his car and looked around. He called Sangi, telling him he'd arrived. Just then, a group of men started walking toward him. Sangi was at the front, and he greeted Mahyak respectfully. But behind him was a crew of guys holding bats and pipes. Mahyak's face hardened. This wasn't a simple welcome party. The men closed in, forming a circle around Mahyak. This was an ambush. Suddenly, the leader of the group started shouting. He demanded to know where Park Sangi was. He clearly wasn't in on the real plan. That's when Park Sangi appeared with his own men. He smirked and gave a fake apology for being late. The chief was furious, yelling at Sangi for what he was doing. But before he could finish, a pair of bright headlights cut through the darkness. A van was speeding right at them. Didn't slow down. The van slammed directly into the chief, sending him flying. He hit the ground hard, but he was still conscious, gritting his teeth as he tried to get back up. Just then, a shadow fell over him. A weapon was swinging down, aimed right for his head. But the chief was fast. He ducked just as the weapon sliced through the air. It slammed into the concrete, right where his head had been a second ago. He didn't stay down, though. He was back on his feet, fighting off two of them at once. He drove his fist right into one of the attacker's jaws. The guy went down hard, but it didn't matter. More men were already closing in, armed with bats and knives. There were just too many of them. They swarmed him, swinging their weapons without mercy. He tried to block the blows, but he was taking a serious beating. Finally, he collapsed to his knees, completely overwhelmed. He was completely at their mercy. The man in the center, clearly the leader, just stared down at him. He looked up, his face filled with pure hatred. He knew who was behind this. It was Park Sang-gi. Sang-gi didn't even flinch. He just looked back, his expression cold and empty. Without a word, one of Sang-gi's men swung a bat right into the side of his head. The blow sent him crashing to the pavement. He didn't move. Everything went dark, but then his eyes snapped open. He wasn't in the container yard anymore. He was sitting in a car, bound by thick ropes, looking around in total confusion. He slowly came to, his head pounding. He looked down and saw his hands were tied tight with thick rope. He whipped his head around, trying to figure out where he was. That's when he saw it. The car was on the ramp of a huge boat surrounded by water. One of the men called out to his chief, and there he was, standing right outside the car window, Park Sang-gi. Sang-gi just stared back, his face completely unreadable. Manhwa exploded with anger, screaming at Sang-gi and demanding to know what he was doing. But Sang-gi was calm. He simply told Manhwa that he had received an order. The order was to make sure Chief Kim Manhwa retired, and it was clear he didn't mean from his job. Manhwa screamed, demanding to know who gave the order. He asked if it was the chairman or maybe one of his uncles, Chin Suhan. His mind was racing. He threw out another name, Chin Jiwon. Park Sang-gi just looked at him coldly. He asked why it even mattered who gave the order. Sang-gi told him they were just servants who did what they were told. The words hit Manhwa hard. He was just a piece to be thrown away. With a final cold look, Sang-gi said goodbye. The ramp of the boat lowered, pointing straight down into the dark water. On command, his men started pushing the car. From inside, all Manhwa could see was the open sea getting closer and closer. This was it. He screamed, begging them to wait, to just hold on for a second. But they didn't listen. The car tipped over the edge and slammed into the cold, dark water. Water started pouring in from all sides. He was trapped. The car sank deeper and deeper, disappearing beneath the waves. He couldn't believe this was how it ended. He'd been loyal to the Chin family like a dog. And for what, to be used and thrown away like this? All that effort was for nothing. But then he saw something. In his hands was a plastic bag. Inside were a couple of small yogurt drinks he didn't recognize. One of them slipped from the bag and floated away into the darkness. As the water filled his lungs, his last thought was of his grandma. He was so sorry. He'd promised to take care of her memorial service. But now, he was on his way to meet her instead. But then, a bright light cut through the darkness. It wasn't the end, it was the sun shining in a clear blue sky. His eyes snapped open. He was floating on his back in calm, clear water, wearing clothes he hadn't seen in years. He shot up out of the water, gasping for air. Couldn't believe it, he was alive. He touched his face, his chest. And then he saw the name tag on his shirt. It was his own. Then a memory hit him, a brutal kick knocking the wind out of him. He stumbled in the shallow water, trying to make sense of it all. Slowly, his mind started to clear. The pieces were coming together. He remembered the fight, a chaotic brawl on the beach. A small smile appeared on his face. It seemed even heaven wanted Kim Manhwa's life to be nothing but chaos. The memory was a mess of flying fists and kicks. It was a complete free-for-all. One guy in a white shirt landed a clean punch right on his jaw. He followed it up with a hard kick, sending the guy stumbling back. The force of the blow sent him crashing into the water. The attacker stood over him, screaming for him to die. This was the fight he remembered. But then his mind cleared. He wasn't just remembering this. He was here. He was actually living it all over again. Before he could even process it, another guy was charging right at him, screaming and ready to swing. But Manhwa's body moved on its own. His fist shot up in a perfect uppercut, connecting with a sickening crunch. The punch sent the guy flying backwards, splashing hard into the water. He looked down at his fist. His body felt light, strong. It felt like he was young again. But there was no time to think. He was ready, screaming in anger. This time, though, he was ready. He met the first one with a sharp kick right to the chest. Without even pausing, he spun with the momentum. His leg swung around and connected perfectly with the second guy's head. Just like that, two more were down on the sand. The others just stood there watching him. The others were furious. They weren't backing down. He moved first, a kick to the face, then a punch to the jaw. Two more went down before they could even react. The next guy swung wildly. Manhwa just ducked under it and drove his fist right into the man's gut. In just a few moments, it was over. Every single one of them was on the ground. But he wasn't done. His expression changed, turning cold and dangerous. The last two guys still standing saw the look in his eyes and froze. They weren't looking at a high school kid anymore. He looked down at them and quietly told them to get lost. They were too terrified to even move. They didn't need to be told twice. The entire group scrambled and ran for it. As soon as they were gone, Manhwa's body gave out and he collapsed onto the sand. He just laid there for a second, catching his breath. That's when someone else showed up, yelling at the guys who were running away. He taunted them, telling them to come back anytime if they wanted another beating. Then he turned to Manhwa and asked if he was all right. He joked that he'd come to the beach to meet girls, not watch a brawl. He noticed Manhwa sweating and offered him a smoke, thinking to himself that this guy definitely didn't fight like a normal high schooler. But when Manhwa looked up, he saw the name tag. Lee Myung-soo. It couldn't be, his best friend from middle school. Then another guy showed up and threw his arm around Manhwa. He was grinning, saying he knew Manhwa was the best fighter around for taking on that whole group by himself. Manhwa recognized him instantly. It was Park Hyun-sung, another one of his close friends from middle school. He even remembered that Hyun-sung's father was a cop, which was why they never worried about getting into trouble. It was all too much. Manhwa finally stood up and looked at his two friends, completely lost. He just asked them where were they and what was going on. Myosu looked at him like he was crazy. He told him they were at Gwangguli Beach. The name hit Mahyuk hard. It didn't make any sense. Myosu started getting worried. He pointed out that Mahyuk was suddenly talking with a different accent and asked if he'd hit his head during the fight. He reached over to check for any bumps, but Mahyuk wasn't listening. He looked at them with a dead serious expression and asked for the date. Not just the day but the year. Myosu just stared at him, confused by the strange question. He told him it was September 1st, 1990. That was it, the confirmation. As the reality sank in for Mahyuk, Myosu became genuinely worried. He told his friend he might be seriously hurt and needed to get checked out. Mahyuk's mind was racing. He looked around trying to make sense of it all. Then he saw a banner floating in the sky. It confirmed the year was 1990. The old cars on the street told the same story. It was real, he'd been killed, pushed into the sea, but somehow he'd come back 30 years into the past. Just then Hyunsung got up, breaking the silence. He suggested they all go get some ramen on him. But then another thought hit Mahyuk like a lightning bolt. September 1st. He suddenly took off running, leaving his friends shouting after him. He remembered what happened on this day. He was running for his grandma, the only real family he ever had. He pushed himself harder. In his first life, this was the day she was gone. He remembered the scene perfectly, finding her collapsed on the floor all alone. In his original life, she'd had a heart attack. He remembered what the doctors told him. If someone had just found her a little sooner, she would have survived. This time, he was going to be that person. He finally made it to the house. The inside was quiet, too quiet. He looked up the stairs, his heart pounding, and there she was, alive. His grandma smiled, asking why he was already back from school. She gently held onto his arm. He could feel her touch, it was real. He could barely get her name out, the relief was just too much. His mind flooded with memories. She was the one who fed him, the one who took care of him. She was always there for him, his only real family. Back in the present, she touched his face. She asked why he was so out of breath, joking that he must have run home because he was hungry. He couldn't hold it back anymore, the tears just started to fall. His grandma was worried now, asking him what was wrong. He just stood there trying to pull himself together. He hugged her tight and told her how much he'd missed her. She just smiled, holding him close. She said that seeing him cry like this made him seem like a little kid again. She kept talking about how he used to be, wondering when he'd grown up so fast. But all he could say was her name. He wiped away his tears, the time for crying was over. Suddenly his whole attitude changed. He grabbed her arm and insisted they go to the hospital right away. He warned her that she could faint at any moment and needed to get checked out immediately. She was completely confused. She told him she felt fine and didn't understand why they needed to go. He got desperate, he grabbed her hand and yelled that this was serious, she could die. But she just held his hand and told him not to be silly. She said she wouldn't pass away until she'd seen him get married and raise his own children. With a warm smile, she told him not to worry about a thing. She then turned and walked inside, telling him to go to his room while she made them some food. He knew she was sick, but she just wouldn't listen. For now, there was nothing he could do. A few moments later, she came back with a simple, warm meal. As they sat down, she served him, gently reminding him to eat slowly. She looked at him with concern, worrying that there weren't enough side dishes to offer. He quickly told her it was perfect, that it had everything he liked. He could barely hold back his tears as he took the first bite. She watched him eat, gently teasing him for eating so fast. Then she got up, telling him she'd also prepared his favorite corn juice. The simple taste of her food broke him. He realized this was all he ever really needed. He couldn't understand why he'd worked like a dog for family that threw him away. Tears just kept streaming down his face. That's when he heard a crash from the other room. He jumped up and ran to the kitchen. His grandmother was on the floor, unconscious. Her face was pale and covered in a cold sweat. His heart stopped, it was happening again. He rushed his grandmother to the emergency room. She was lying in a hospital bed, pale and still. Muhayak sat down with the doctor, who told him they got her there just in time. But after running some tests, the doctor explained that she would need surgery. If they didn't do it, she could collapse again at any moment. The news hit him hard. Surgery meant money, and he didn't have any. The irony was crushing. In his past life, he handled billions of won. Now he looked down at the few coins in his hand, it was all he had. But then his friends showed up at the reception desk. One of them pulled out some cash and told the receptionist they would pay. One of them explained it was his allowance money and told Muhayak not to worry about paying them back. They just wanted to help. One of his friends insisted, saying this wasn't something to pay back. He reminded Muhayak how many times his grandmother had cooked for them. He told Muhayak to just focus on taking care of his grandma, promising they'd all visit her often. Another friend then asked if his grandma was really okay, wondering what kind of treatment she needed. Muhayak's mind flashed back to the doctor's office. He remembered the grim news, surgery was necessary. Without it, she could collapse again at any moment. His friend's voice broke through his thoughts, asking how much it would cost. Muhayak already knew the answer, 10 million won. The number hit him hard. Before he died and came back, 10 million won was pocket change. But now in this life, it was an impossible fortune. He clenched his fist, feeling completely helpless. But he refused to stay that way. He walked out of the hospital and straight to a payphone. It was time to make a call. He put one of his last coins into the payphone slot. His mind was made up. This was the only way to get the money for his grandma's surgery. The person on the other end confirmed the address. He was calling Pyeongchang-dong. He introduced himself as Kim Muhayak, stating he had a message for Chairman Chin Tison. He told them to pass along a message. Kim Muhayak, the son of the chairman's only daughter, wanted to see his grandfather. A confident smirk spread across his face. The call was made, now all he could do was wait. He went up to the hospital rooftop to get some air. Looking out, he saw the Busan of 1990, a time before all the huge buildings went up. It was exactly how he remembered it. It wasn't a dream, he was really back. But a terrifying thought crossed his mind. If he was back, did that mean he was doomed to die the same way again in 30 years? His thoughts immediately went to his uncle, Chairman Chin Suman. He was the most likely suspect. Only his uncle had the power to turn Mahyuk's own men against him, but the question was, why? It didn't make sense. Mahyuk was still useful to him back then. He started to wonder, could it have been someone else? He thought about his other uncle, Chin Sodhin. He couldn't figure it out, who was it that had him taken out. But then he stopped worrying about it. It didn't matter who did it. This was his chance. His chance to destroy the Chin family and take over their entire empire. Just then, a voice called out to him from behind. It was a man covered in tattoos wearing hospital clothes. He pointed his cigarette at Mahyuk and told him to come over. Mahyuk turned, wondering who this guy was. The man with the tattoos smirked and asked for his name. Mahyuk was caught off guard. He wondered why this guy, who looked like a gangster, wanted to know who he was. Another man in a flashy shirt started laughing, making fun of Mahyuk for trying to act tough. The tattooed man was getting angry, demanding some respect. But Mahyuk didn't back down. He just said that if you want to know someone's name, you should give yours first. The man shot up, clearly annoyed, and yelled out his name, Park Dong-soo. The name hit Mahyuk instantly. He knew exactly who Park Dong-soo was. He was the second in charge of the Sasang gang, a legendary figure who was supposed to be the next leader. But Mahyuk also remembered what happened to him. Around this time, during the government's war on crime, Park Dong-soo was framed for everything his boss did. He was found in a motel, gone for good at just 29 years old. Park Dong-soo couldn't believe it. He asked Mahyuk if he seriously didn't know who he was. Mahyuk just glanced back, completely unfazed. He sarcastically asked if Dong-soo ran a comic book store or something. Dong-soo was clearly done with the jokes. He said he'd already given his name and now it was Mahyuk's turn. Without any hesitation, he told him his name was Kim Mahyuk. Dong-soo repeated the name to himself, then started making fun of it, saying it was a killer name. Mahyuk just thought to himself how childish this guy was acting. Then Dong-soo's whole attitude changed. He asked if Mahyuk was the good kid from room 405. Turns out, the whole hospital was buzzing with rumors about how well he was taking care of his grandma. Mahyuk just looked at him and said it was only natural. She was his only family. Dong-soo seemed to agree, admitting that Mahyuk was right. Taking care of family was just what you do. Dong-soo then asked about Mahyuk's school, pointing out his uniform. Mahyuk shot back with a question of his own, bluntly asking if Dong-soo was a thug. Dong-soo acted surprised, denying he was a thug and asking why Mahyuk would even think that. Mahyuk just stared at him. He pointed out that Dong-soo's condition made it look like he'd been stabbed. Dong-soo scoffed at that. He tried to play it off, saying it was normal for men to get into fights and that a kid like Mahyuk wouldn't get it. This seemed to really get under Dong-soo's skin. He demanded to know why Mahyuk wasn't scared of him. Mahyuk just asked if there was any reason he should be. Dong-soo was clearly getting pissed off. He complained that Mahyuk always had to have the last word. Mahyuk calmly asked if he could leave now. Defeated, Dong-soo just told him to go. As Mahyuk walked away, Dong-soo called out, telling him to take care of his grandmother. He thought about the man he'd just met, Park Dong-soo of the Sasang gang. At this point in time, the gang wasn't a national powerhouse, but they were still a serious crew. He filed that information away. A guy like that could be useful to him one day. With that settled, he headed back to the hospital. When he walked into his grandmother's room, he saw she wasn't alone. She called out his name, telling him someone was there to see him. She had a worried look on her face, clearly unsure about this stranger. The man in the suit turned to face him. Mahyuk recognized him instantly. It was Director Ha. Mahyuk was stunned. He never expected his grandfather's people to show up this quickly. Not wanting to disturb his grandmother, Mahyuk told the man they should talk somewhere else. They left the hospital and walked down the street. They ended up at a small coffee house, sitting across from each other in a booth. The man slid a business card across the table. He introduced himself as Ha Myung-hoon, saying he worked for Chairman Chin Tae-sun. Mahyuk took the card. He knew exactly who this was, his grandfather's right-hand man. He remembered him clearly. In his first life, Ha Myung-hoon was the one who told him about his real grandfather, right after his grandmother's funeral. Ha Myung-hoon started to explain that he needed Mahyuk to come with him to Seoul. But before he could finish, Mahyuk cut him off, asking why the chairman didn't come himself. The director was speechless. That was not the response he was expecting. Mahyuk just stared back at him, completely calm. Ha Myung-hoon was taken aback. This kid's confidence felt real, not like some bluff. He didn't act like a normal high schooler at all. Ha Myung-hoon tried to explain that the chairman was a busy man and couldn't just come here. But Mahyuk corrected him, saying he wasn't asking the chairman to meet him. He was talking about his mother, Kim Maseon, the chairman's own daughter. Mahyuk knew his grandfather would probably just scoff at the request. After all, the man hadn't even bothered to visit his own daughter's memorial. He laid out his terms clearly. If the chairman wanted a meeting, he had to pay his respects to his daughter first. Ha Myung-hoon was completely stunned. He had no idea what to say. Mahyuk thought back to his first life. Back then, he was just a helpless orphan who had to do whatever they said. But not this time. In his first life, his grandmother passed away. While Mahyuk was still grieving, Ha Myung-hoon arrived with an offer from the chairman. They would take care of all the funeral expenses. The chairman promised to take care of him, but only if Mahyuk did exactly as he was told. Back then, he had no other choice. Without his grandfather's help, he would have had to quit school and give up on everything. But that was the past. This time, things would be completely different. He wasn't that helpless kid anymore. He stood up, looking down at the man who once held all the power over him. He repeated his condition one last time. If the chairman wanted a meeting, he had to come to Busan himself. With that, he turned to leave, politely telling director Ha Myung-hoon to have a safe trip back. The conversation was over. Ha Myung-hoon sat there in silence. He couldn't shake the feeling of pressure that Manhwa left behind. It was making him nervous. He watched Manhwa walk away. The report he'd gotten described a simple troublemaker, but this was something else entirely. This was the son of the chairman's only daughter, and he was definitely not just some average kid. Later, Manhwa was at the hospital. He told his grandmother what happened. She was stunned, asking if the chairman really wanted him to come to Seoul. Manhwa explained that he'd refused. He told her he demanded that his grandfather visit his mother's resting place first. It had been 17 years and the chairman had never once paid his respects. His grandmother was terrified. She asked him if he had any idea what kind of person his grandfather really was. He told her he'd found the phone number she tried to hide from him. That's how he contacted his grandfather's men. His grandmother couldn't believe it. His grandmother looked at him with worried eyes, telling him he needed to be good to his grandfather. But Manhwa couldn't understand why. He asked why he should be nice to the man who had ignored them for 17 years. She tried to argue with him, but she was too weak to find the right words. He pulled her into a hug, telling her not to worry about any of it. He said all that mattered was her health because she was the only person he needed. He held her tight. She was the person who loved him most in the world. In his first life, he lost her without any warning. He promised himself that this time things would be different. He was going to make her happy. He just held her, soaking in the moment. This was his reason for everything. Meanwhile, in Seoul, the same time in a massive house in Seoul, Manhwa's message was being delivered. Chairman Chin Tae-sun listened to the report, repeating the boy's demand. Manhwa expected him to come to Busan personally. His man Ha Myung-hoon confirmed it. Manhwa would only agree to a meeting if the chairman visited his mother's memorial first. The chairman didn't get angry, instead he just smirked. He wondered if the boy was just incredibly brave or completely out of his mind. Either way, Manhwa had definitely gotten his attention. He stood up and made his choice. He would go to Busan and see for himself what kind of person his grandson really was. But this wasn't about family. If the boy proved useful, the chairman planned to work him to the bone like a slave. Manhwa walked back into his high school classroom. The second he stepped in, one of his friends called out, happy to see him back. His friend asked how his grandmother was doing. Manhwa told him that thanks to his help, she was finally out of the hospital. Since it had been a while, his friend suggested they skip class and go play some pool. But Manhwa wasn't interested. For him, being back in high school after all those years felt strange. He just sat down and told his friend they should get ready for class. His friend was completely stunned, asking what on earth was wrong with him. He couldn't believe Manhwa was actually studying. He grabbed onto him, totally confused by the sudden change. He remembered that in his first life, studying was the last thing on his mind. It only became important after he met his grandfather. He remembered arriving at the massive Chin family estate. The meeting took place in his grandfather's study. The tension was so thick you could feel it. Manhwa kept his head down, not daring to meet his grandfather's cold, judging stare. His grandfather looked at him with disgust, calling him a good-for-nothing. He told Manhwa to listen carefully. From that moment on, he had only one goal, get into Korea University Law School. He admitted he didn't think Manhwa had a chance, but this would be the test to see if he could become a worthy person. He'd provide a roof over his head, but nothing more. But if he failed, the relationship between him and the Chin family would be over for good. At that time, just to survive and earn his grandfather's respect, he knew he had to get in, no matter what. He remembered getting accepted, finally earning a place at his grandfather's side, but that victory came at a price. The Chin family used him like a tool, working him to the bone until he was broken. But this time, things would be different. He was still going to study, but not for them. He had his own goal now. The school hallways were busy, just like any other day. Suddenly, a teacher stormed in holding a bat. He screamed at the students, demanding to know why they weren't in their classroom yet. He walked to the front of the class, his expression still furious. He slammed the attendance book down on the desk with a loud crack. The class representative immediately stood up and told everyone to get ready to greet the teacher. The whole class bowed their heads in perfect unison. His eyes scanned the room and locked onto one student. He yelled for Manhwa to come to the front. Manhwa didn't even flinch, he just stood up and walked forward. The teacher pointed the bat at the floor, ordering him to get down for his punishment. He tapped the bat against Manhwa's head, demanding to know how many days he'd missed. He accused Manhwa of treating school like a playground, a place he could just come and go as he pleased. Manhwa calmly explained that he was sorry, but he had to take care of his grandmother. The teacher didn't care about his excuse, he just slapped him hard across the face. He even mocked him for being a good grandson. But Manhwa just stared back, his expression turning cold. The teacher accused him of lying, saying he was probably out drinking instead of taking care of anyone. He was furious, demanding to know how Manhwa dared to lie to his face. He ordered him to get down on the floor for more punishment. But Manhwa remembered this man. He was his homeroom teacher from freshman year. Manhwa's calm stare just made the teacher even angrier. He grabbed him, furious that he wasn't afraid. He screamed at him to get down, completely losing his temper. Manhwa knew there was another reason for all this. It wasn't just about missing school. He remembered the teacher visiting his home earlier that year. He tried to get bribe money from his grandmother, but Manhwa had stopped her from giving him the cash she'd worked so hard for. That's when the beatings started. The teacher completely lost his temper. He screamed at Mahyuk for not getting down, then slapped him hard across the face. Mahyuk finally got into position. The teacher wasn't done though. He grabbed a bat and accused him of always getting into fights. He called Mahyuk trash, yelling that he'd only end up as a gangster. Then he swung the bat with all his strength. Just as he brought the bat down, the classroom door flew open. A man in a suit rushed in, looking completely panicked. It was the vice principal. He looked terrified as he asked the teacher if Kim Mahyuk was in this class. The teacher was confused, but down on the floor, Mahyuk looked up with a small knowing smirk. He knew exactly what was happening. Outside, a huge, expensive black car pulled up to the school. It was the kind of car that made everyone stop and stare. A man in a sharp black suit stepped out. He looked like he meant business. The man confirmed he was looking for Kim Mahyuk and told him to get in the car. As Mahyuk got in, he could feel hundreds of eyes on him from the school windows. Everyone was watching. The teacher who had just been hitting him stood there completely stunned. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Mahyuk settled into the back seat, his expression calm and serious. And then he saw him. Sitting across from him, casually reading a newspaper, was the lone shark king himself. It was his grandfather Chintisan. He had actually come all the way to Busan, just like Mahyuk demanded. The old man lowered his newspaper and looked at his grandson for the first time. His eyes were cold, like he was sizing up an investment. Outside, the driver stood guard as the car door closed, sealing the two of them inside. The real meeting had begun. The old man finally spoke. He introduced himself as Chintisan and asked if Mahyuk was his daughter's son. Mahyuk looked at him. For his grandfather, this was their first meeting. For Mahyuk, it was a reunion. The last time he saw this man was just a day before he passed away in the future. Mahyuk answered without hesitation, confirming that his father was Kim Tisu and his mother was Chin Masuk. His grandfather didn't seem angry. Instead, a small smile formed on his face. He was clearly interested. The old man then stated plainly that he was here because Mahyuk had asked him to come in person. But Mahyuk didn't let him control the conversation. He immediately asked if he had stopped by to see his mother at her grave. His grandfather looked at him and confirmed that he had. Mahyuk then explained why he'd made the request. He'd heard that his grandfather hadn't visited his own daughter's grave even once since she died. He felt it was only right that he go there first before coming to see him. Mahyuk then added that his grandmother, the woman who raised him, wasn't well. He made it clear that he couldn't just leave her alone. Chintisan just listened, not saying a word. The chairman was impressed. He couldn't believe this young kid wasn't scared of him in the slightest. So he asked him directly if Mahyuk even knew who he was dealing with. Mahyuk looked right at him and said he knew exactly who he was. He started listing off the details. His grandfather was a legend in the private lending world. A man who came from nothing during the war and clawed his way to the top of the political and economic food chain by the 1970s. Mahyuk explained that back then, there wasn't a single powerful person who hadn't borrowed money from him. Whether they were the heads of giant companies or powerful politicians, they all owed him. Mahyuk explained that even now in the 90s, his grandfather ruled the country with trillions in underground money. He was Chintisan, the lone shark king. After laying all that out, Mahyuk simply said he'd heard his grandfather ran a business. The chairman played along, claiming he just ran a small private lending business in Seoul. He asked if Mahyuk even knew what a private lender does. Mahyuk knew better. This wasn't some small business. Chintisan decided to cut straight to the point. He asked why Mahyuk wanted to see him and what it was that he wanted. Mahyuk lowered his head. He told his grandfather that there was only one thing he wanted. Then he looked up, a greedy, almost crazy smile spreading across his face. He said that what he needed to bring down the Chin family was money. Mahyuk laid out his first condition. He explained that his grandmother, the woman who raised him for 17 years, needed heart surgery. He needed $1,000,000 for that. But that wasn't all. He also demanded another $1,000,000 every single month for his school fees and living expenses until he graduated. Chintisan listened, but he wasn't impressed. To him, this was just pocket change. He thought the boy had no insides, calling him all the way out here for such a small amount. Mahyuk must have sensed his grandfather's thoughts. He made it clear he wasn't asking for a gift. This was a loan and he fully intended to pay it back. A small smile crept across Chintisan's face. This kid was starting to amuse him. The old man considered it. From a business standpoint, it was ridiculous. He knew Mahyuk couldn't even afford the interest, so the idea of him paying back the full amount was impossible. He decided to test him. He explained that while it was easy to lend money, loan sharks don't just give it away for nothing. He looked his grandson dead in the eye and asked the most important question. What did Mahyuk have to offer as collateral? What proof did he have that he could ever pay it back? Mahyuk answered without a moment's hesitation. He tapped his head. His brain was his collateral. Chintisan's eyes widened. He had not expected that. Mahyuk laid out his promise. If his grandfather lent him the money, he would get into Korean University Law School. That achievement would be his proof that he could pay back every cent. The old man just listened, taking it all in. This was a huge moment for Mahyuk. In his past life, his grandfather had forced this deal on him. But this time, he was the one making the offer, taking control. Mahyuk knew exactly what he was doing. Chintisan had a deep respect for education because he never had the chance to get one himself. As he got richer, he became obsessed with his children's schooling. But his own sons, Mahyuk's uncles, were a huge disappointment. They barely scraped into college, even after he'd spent a fortune on them. Mahyuk knew his mother was another source of his grandfather's disappointment. She had been accepted into a top university, but dropped out to be with his father. So the idea of his grandson getting into the best law school in the country wasn't just a promise. It was a chance to erase a deep family disappointment. But Chintisan was no fool. He knew Hayek's grades were nowhere near good enough to get in, and he wondered if the kid was just bluffing. So he asked him straight up how confident he was. He wanted to know what would happen if he failed. Hayek knew it wasn't a guarantee. But right now, the most important thing was to get his grandfather on his side. He looked his grandfather in the eye and made an unbreakable promise. If he didn't get into law school, his entire life would belong to him. That was an offer Chintasen could accept. The boy's entire future was on the line. But then Hayek added another condition. If he passed, he expected a congratulatory present. The old man was surprised. The kid wanted something more. Hayek said he'd tell his grandfather what he wanted for present, but only after he got into law school. He made it clear that he planned on asking for a huge gift when the time came. Chintasen didn't say anything. He just sat there taking it all in. For a second, the car was completely silent, and a slow grin started to spread across his face. Suddenly, he just burst out laughing. He agreed to the deal, saying he couldn't wait to see what kind of gift the boy would ask for. But just as quickly, his expression turned serious again. He reminded Hayek of the price of failure. He made it clear that if Hayek failed, his entire life would belong to him. He would have to do whatever he was told, no questions asked. He told Hayek that if he failed, he'd be forced to do things that would make even monsters tremble in fear. The old man's presence felt huge, like a demon looming over him. But Hayek didn't even flinch. He just calmly accepted the deal. With the deal made, his grandfather's car drove off, leaving him standing alone. Hayek just scoffed. He thought it was pathetic for an old man to try and scare a kid like that. He thought about his grandfather's words, the idea of becoming a monster. He actually kind of liked it. A dark smile spread across his face. He decided then and there that if his grandfather wanted a monster, he'd get one, a fiend that would tear the entire Chin family to pieces. Miles away, the car continued down the road. The driver looked back, surprised by the chairman's reaction. Chintasen just smiled to himself, thinking that Hayek was a very interesting kid. The driver admitted he was shocked, telling the chairman that Hayek was completely different from what the reports had said. Chintasen stared out the window. He explained that in his business, he'd met every kind of person imaginable. He'd seen people who brought gangsters to threaten him, people who threatened to hurt themselves, and even those who would sell their own children for money. He said that after dealing with people like that for so long, you start to get a feel for what kind of person someone is at first glance. Their eyes, expressions, body language, the tone of their voice. You can tell almost everything you need to know. But with Hayek, he was clueless. In fact, the chairman felt like the boy was the one judging him. The driver glanced in the mirror and commented that it seemed the chairman liked him. Chintasen just quietly said his daughter's name, Masion, as if lost in a memory. Chintasen leaned back in his seat, lost in thought. The driver glanced back, noticing the chairman's silence. With that, they drove off. Meanwhile, at Daehan Busan Hospital, Hayek bowed deeply to the doctor, asking him to please take care of his grandmother. The doctor tried to reassure him, saying it wasn't a difficult surgery. The light was on, the surgery had begun. At the same time, another young man was walking through the hospital hallways. Suddenly, someone called out his name, Kang Mu, and he turned around. A man in pajamas suddenly threw his arm around Hayek's shoulders. He started asking him if he was going to school and eating properly, like they were old friends. The man, Park Dong-soo, then asked if he wanted to go for a smoke on the rooftop. Hayek just looked annoyed and told him he was busy studying. Dong-soo couldn't believe it. He shouted that kids should be having fun, not wasting their youth studying, but Hayek just kept walking away. Dong-soo sighed, admitting he couldn't hold him back if he really needed to study. He reached into his pocket to grab something. He pulled out a pack of chewing gum and offered it to Hayek. He told him to chew it if he started feeling sleepy. With a final wave, Dong-soo walked off down the hall. Hayek was left standing there, holding the pack of gum. Hayek knew exactly who that man was. Park Dong-soo was a well-known thug, second in command of a gang with hundreds of members. Still, he found him surprisingly amusing. But he also knew what was coming. Soon, the government would declare a war on crime, and when that happened, Park Dong-soo wouldn't survive. As he turned to leave, something outside the window caught his eye. Down on the street, Park Dong-soo was being cornered by two other men. One of them was holding a weapon. It was an ambush, but Dong-soo wasn't going down without a fight. He pulled out a knife, ready to defend himself. Hayek recognized the attackers instantly. He knew exactly who they were and why they were there. He walked away from the window, his mind racing. This wasn't right. In his memory, Park Dong-soo wasn't supposed to die today. But then a new thought crossed his mind. This change wasn't a problem. It was an opportunity. A sly grin spread across his face. If he saved Dong-soo now, he could get a powerful ally on his side. Back inside the hospital, things were quiet at the reception desk. Suddenly, a group of rough-looking men slammed a box on the counter. The leader demanded to know where they could find Park Dong-soo's room. When the nurse asked what their relationship was to the patient, the man just scoffed, telling her it was obvious they were visitors. Just then, Hayek walked up and bowed politely. He calmly asked if they were looking for someone named Dong-soo. With a friendly smile, he told them he was Dong-soo's little brother and offered to lead them right to his ward. The men looked at each other, considering the offer. They seemed to buy it. Hayek's expression hardened. He couldn't let these guys cause a scene while his grandmother was in surgery. His first priority was to get them out of the hospital. He led them out of the building and into a quiet alleyway, right where he wanted them. The leader of the group pointed angrily at Hayek. He demanded to know what was going on and where he had brought them. Hayek turned around, his expression completely calm. He cut straight to the point, asking if they were there to take out Park Dong-soo. The leader was stunned. He pulled out a knife and furiously demanded to know who this kid was. But Hayek wasn't scared at all. He just casually started stretching his arm as if they weren't even there. Suddenly, a voice called out from behind them. The gangsters turned, surprised by the interruption. It was Park Dong-soo standing there in his hospital gown. He called them out, asking if they had any shame pulling a knife on a high schooler. One of the men recognized him instantly. His face twisted with rage as he screamed Dong-soo's name. Without another word, he charged forward and threw a punch right at him. The punch landed hard right in Dong-soo's face. Moo-hyuk just watched from the side, completely unfazed. He wasn't planning on stepping in just yet. But Dong-soo barely even flinched. He just took the hit, glaring right back at his attacker. The attacker cried out in pain. Turns out he'd just broken his own hand on Dong-soo's head. Dong-soo didn't waste the opening. He sent the man flying with a powerful kick to the chest. The guy's eyes went wide with shock as he tumbled backward. But before he could even hit the ground, Dong-soo grabbed him by the hair. And then he slammed the man's face straight into the pavement. The other two thugs in there later just stared. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. But Dong-soo was just getting started. He ripped off his hospital gown, ready for more. Seeing this, one of the men charged forward, leaping into the air with a pipe. Dong-soo just raised his arm and blocked it like it was nothing. He dropped the man in a single move. Now there were only two left. He grabbed the guy by the hair, not even giving him a chance to get up. The last man standing saw his chance and threw a punch. It's when Moo-hyuk finally took a step forward. He was done watching. Before the thug's punch could even land, Moo-hyuk stepped in and smacked him right across the face with a slipper. The guy was completely stunned. He just got hit with a slipper in the middle of a serious fight. That was the only opening Dong-soo needed. He launched himself forward to finish this. A brutal kick sent the man flying backwards. And just like that, it was over. Both of them were down for the count. But the other guy, the one with the buzz cut, wasn't done yet. His eyes darted around, looking for anything he could use as a weapon. He spotted some old window panes nearby. Without hesitating, he grabbed one and held it up, ready for one last desperate hit. But Dong-soo was ready. He raised his arm to block, and the glass pane shattered against him. The impact sent both of them flying back. But only one of them got back up. The fight was over. Dong-soo turned around. Moo-hyuk had been standing there the whole time. A little while later, back in the hospital hallway, Dong-soo let out a satisfied sigh. He stretched his arm and grinned, telling Moo-hyuk it felt great to loosen up. He explained that he'd recently beaten those guys in a fight over territory. He said he knew they'd eventually come looking for him while he was stuck in the hospital. He admitted he'd been keeping an eye out for them, but it was Moo-hyuk's arrival that seemed to kick everything off. Dong-soo looked at him, impressed. He told Moo-hyuk he had some serious insides for not even flinching when he saw the knife. Moo-hyuk calmly replied that he wasn't scared because he knew Dong-soo was on his way. He'd already noticed the gang members guarding the hospital. He added that even if he hadn't gotten involved, the outcome would have been the same. Park Dong-soo was more than strong enough to handle those guys on his own. Dong-soo wasn't having it. He threw his arm around Moo-hyuk, insisting he still owed him a favor. He told the kid to name his price, money, a woman, anything he wanted. But Moo-hyuk wasn't thinking about money. This was his chance. He knew Park Dong-soo was going to be the first piece in his plan, and he had to make him his. So he looked at Dong-soo and gave him a strange order. He told him to take only his most trusted men and go into hiding for 3 months. Dong-soo was completely confused. He asked what the hell he was talking about. He'd offered him a reward, and this kid was telling him to run and hide. Moo-hyuk looked him dead in the eye. He explained that soon the president was going to declare a war on crime. A nationwide arrest order was coming for every single gang in the country. Dong-soo just stared, the words war on crime echoing in his head. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Moo-hyuk explained that in October 1990, the president would declare this war just to distract the public from the government's own problems. He told him that while there had been small crackdowns in the past, this was going to be on a completely different level. It wasn't just a warning. It was a full-scale operation to wipe out every single criminal group in the country, big or small. He stressed that Dong-soo's hiding spot had to be a complete secret. Not even his own gang members could know where he was. And then he gave him one last critical piece of advice. He especially needed to be careful of his own boss, Lee Se-sung. With that, Moo-hyuk told him that was his wish, his reward for saving him. He turned and walked away, leaving Dong-soo alone in the hallway to think. He had laid out the path. Now it was up to Dong-soo to make a choice. If the man was smart enough to survive, he would become a very useful piece on the board. A month later, Dong-soo and his men were hiding out on Jirisan Mountain. Just as Moo-hyuk had warned, the president declared a war against crime and violence. On October 13, 1990, the government was given full authority to wipe out all criminal organizations. Dong-soo and his men couldn't believe what they were reading. Every prosecutor and police officer had been mobilized, and all the gangs in Busan were being rounded up. The worst part was that even his own boss, Lee Se-sung, had been arrested. He immediately ordered his men to stay put and not draw any attention to themselves. He stared at the words, his mind reeling. Everything was happening exactly like that kid said it would. He remembered scoffing at the warning, thinking it was complete nonsense, but he had been wrong. But that wasn't the only thing Moo-hyuk had told him. He'd also mentioned a big event that was about to happen in Germany. And just like he said, on October 3, 1990, the news broke. After years of being divided, Germany was finally reunified. Dong-soo's mind was blown. That high school kid had predicted everything down to the exact details. He couldn't understand how it was possible. He started to wonder, who exactly was Kim Moo-hyuk? Turns out Moo-hyuk's grandfather was quick to handle things. He had already set them up in a new place, the Nanshan Apartments. Inside, his grandma looked around, completely overwhelmed. She started to say his name, but he gently told her to just take it all in. He explained that he got the money from his grandpa, who had come to see him after 17 years. He told her she didn't need to work anymore. She looked worried, telling him she didn't know if it was okay for her to take something like this. Manhwa insisted that she more than deserved it after everything she'd been through. He promised to make sure she could live comfortably and just focus on her health. She just looked at him, her eyes welling up with tears. Just then, two of Manhwa's friends burst through the door, carrying bags of food. They were there to celebrate his grandma being discharged from the hospital. One of them cheered, saying they should grill the pork belly they brought and have a real feast. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. For the first time, it felt like a real home filled with laughter and good food. This was the life he was determined to protect. But his new life wasn't just about his family. He had other plans to set in motion, and they started back at school. It was a perfect day, but everyone was on edge. One of his friends complained that getting their test grades back was completely ruining the mood. His friends were already bickering about who did worse. One of them even started bragging that he was in the top 500 out of 520 students. That's when his friend turned to him, asking how he did since he'd been studying so hard. Manhwa just said he improved a little and needed to work even harder. But inside, he knew he'd done more than just a little better. Getting back into the mindset of a student had been tough, but he was sure he had nailed it. And soon enough, everyone was about to find out just how well he'd really done. Suddenly, another student ran up to their group with some unbelievable news. He announced that Manhwa had ranked first in the entire school on the exam. His friends were stunned. The other student insisted it was true, saying he'd heard it himself in the teacher's office that morning. Just then, their homeroom teacher appeared at the classroom door. He called for Manhwa, telling him he was wanted in the office. His friends were buzzing, wondering if he was about to get some kind of award. They urged him to hurry up and go. Manhwa made his way to the teacher's office. Inside, a teacher named Mr. Park was waiting for him. He sat with his arms crossed and asked Manhwa if he knew why he'd been called in. Manhwa just looked back at him, feigning confusion. Before he could even answer, Mr. Park lunged across the desk and slapped him hard across the face. His friends were watching from the window, completely shocked by what they were seeing. Mr. Park asked him again why he was there, but Manhwa just played dumb. The slap was so hard it echoed through the office. He pointed right at Manhwa and accused him of cheating on the exam. The teacher couldn't understand how the worst student in school could suddenly be the best, but Manhwa knew this wasn't about the test. It was about what happened a few days ago. He remembered asking Mr. Park to talk to his grandpa from Seoul. Manhwa was trying to get his grandfather's attention, and it was clear the teacher felt like he was being used. Mr. Park had been annoyed even then, calling out to him as he tried to leave. Back in the present, the teacher's anger exploded. He grabbed a bat and demanded to know who helped him cheat. Manhwa looked him straight in the eye and told him he didn't cheat. But the teacher wasn't listening. He mocked Manhwa, asking if his grandma taught him to cheat on school exams. That was the last straw. Mr. Park threatened to gouge his eyes out and demanded an immediate apology. But Manhwa's anger exploded. He yelled back, asking what any of this had to do with his grandma. Then he demanded that the teacher be the one to apologize. That sent the teacher over the edge. He screamed at Manhwa, slapping him hard across the face. He declared he didn't even need to check. He tore Manhwa's exam papers to pieces, saying he was getting a 0 for cheating. With a nasty smile, he told Manhwa he was suspended indefinitely. But Manhwa wasn't done. He looked the teacher dead in the eye and proposed a bet. He offered to solve every single exam question again, right there in front of him. The other teachers in the office just stared, unable to believe what they were hearing. He laid out the terms. If he didn't get the exact same score, he would drop out of school. Mr. Park started to sweat. He knew there was more coming. Then Manhwa delivered the final blow. If he got the same score, Mr. Park would have to resign from the school. That was it. The teacher completely snapped, grabbing a baseball bat to attack him. But before the bat could even connect, Manhwa caught it with one hand. He calmly asked the teacher if he wasn't confident enough to take the bet. The teacher was furious. He pointed at Manhwa and yelled for someone to bring him the test papers. The bet was on. The news of the showdown started to spread. Students crowded the hallway outside the office, trying to see what was happening. So they sat him down right there in the office. Manhwa began to retake the entire exam, with every teacher watching his every move. Mr. Park started to sweat, his confidence fading. He watched Manhwa fly through the questions without making a single mistake. One by one, he finished each test. Korean history, math, physics. Every single one was a perfect score. Another teacher leaned over to Mr. Park, his voice low. He told him that if Manhwa got the English questions right, he'd have a perfect score in every subject. Mr. Park's face went pale. Manhwa looked up from his desk. He calmly told Mr. Park that he was on the last question now. He reminded him that if this answer was right, the teacher would have to leave the school forever. Manhwa looked him dead in the eye and laid out his final terms. He warned the teacher that if he broke his promise and came back to school, he wouldn't be treated with any respect. Mr. Park was sweating, completely stunned by the student's cold threat. Outside the office, other students were pressed against the glass, watching the whole thing go down in disbelief. Then Manhwa gave him one last chance. He said if Mr. Park apologized right then, he'd stop answering the questions. The offer just made Mr. Park even angrier. He was completely speechless. That's when another teacher finally had enough and jumped in. He yelled for both of them to stop, saying Manhwa had already proven he didn't cheat. He then turned to Mr. Park and told him he should be apologizing. He said he should be praising Manhwa for his grades, not accusing him. The other teachers in the room just watched the whole scene unfold, completely stunned. Finally, Mr. Park caved. He stammered out an apology. He admitted that he had misunderstood the whole situation. With the apology given, Manhwa slapped his hand down on the test. he was done. He told the stunned teacher he was heading back to class and walked right past him. As soon as he stepped out of the teacher's office, his classmates were waiting for him. He walked down the hall like a returning hero, with everyone cheering him on. Sure enough, when the school rankings were posted, Kim Mahyuk's name was right at the top. The news spread like wildfire. Later, walking home with his friends, they couldn't stop talking about it. They were laughing about how angry the teacher looked. One of them asked if it was true he was the top student in the whole school now, and if he was really going to try for Korean university. Mahyuk stopped. He looked down at his friends and told them they needed to get serious too. He offered to help Musu study and told Hyunsung to start judo again so he could get into college with a sports scholarship. He knew Musu was smart. He'd had good grades in middle school but went to a vocational high school to follow his passion. And Hyunsung had been a promising judo player, but he gave it up to come to a school without a sports team, just so they could all stay together. But his friends just brushed it off. Musu said it was too late to study and that he'd probably just take over his dad's nightclub. Hyunsung agreed, saying he was too out of shape now and would likely just end up working in a factory. Mahyuk looked at them seriously. He told them that soon he had something important to do in Seoul. He explained that it would be too hard to do alone, and he really needed their help. He asked them to work hard together so they could all go to Seoul as a team. He knew that just knowing the future wasn't enough to get revenge by himself. He needed people who would never betray him, people he could trust with his life. And he knew he could trust these too. With his friends on board, Mahyuk went back to focusing on his studies. He poured everything into his schoolwork. And just as planned, he easily ranked first in the second semester final exams. Inspired by Mahyuk, Musu started taking his studies seriously, and his grades began to improve. Hyunsung also returned to his judo training. Slowly but surely, everything was falling into place. Winter arrived, blanketing the city in snow. With the new season came a new chapter in his plan. Finally, the day came. Mahyuk was picked up and brought to a place he knew all too well. He stood before the impenetrable fortress of the Chin family. This was Pyeongchang-dong, one of the richest neighborhoods in the entire country. This was where his grandfather Chin Taesin had built his stronghold. Chin Taesin wasn't just rich, he was the most powerful money lender in the nation. His influence was so great that he had survived military takeovers and changes in government. This place wasn't just a house, it was the untouchable fortress of the Lone Shark King. This was the heart of his grandfather's empire, a fortress built on money and power. Inside, Mahyuk sat across from his grandfather. They ate at opposite ends of a long table in complete silence. The old man didn't say a word, he just ate watching. That's when Mahyuk realized something. This wasn't how it happened in his past life. Back then, he didn't meet his grandfather until after he'd gotten into law school. This could only mean one thing. His grandfather's evaluation of him had already changed. After dinner, they moved to another room. They sat across from each other, the tension still hanging in the air. His grandfather finally spoke. He mentioned that he'd heard Mahyuk had ranked first in school for 2 semesters in a row. The grandfather admitted that while Mahyuk's school wasn't the best, his claims about his intelligence weren't just empty words. He tapped his temple, acknowledging Mahyuk's sharp mind. Mahyuk listened, a confident smile playing on his lips. The grandfather decided to reward him for keeping his promise. He asked Mahyuk if there was anything he wanted. Mahyuk initially stuck to their original deal. He said he would tell him what he wanted after he got accepted into the university. But his grandfather pushed back. He confirmed he would honor the university deal, but he wanted to know what Mahyuk desired right now. Mahyuk wondered if the old man was trying to play the part of a kind grandfather. He thought about just asking for a simple allowance. But then he made his move. He looked his grandfather in the eye and asked for company shares. The grandfather seemed suspicious, asking if Mahyuk even knew anything about the stock market. Mahyuk played along, admitting he didn't know much and that's why he was asking for his grandfather's guidance. He then asked which company's stocks would be a good investment right now. Mahyuk figured asking for stocks instead of cash would just seem like a harmless request from a grandchild. It was the perfect way to hide his real intentions. The old man's lips curled into a slight smile. He was amused. He called over his director, a man named Ha, and asked about their stake in Dahyun Corporation. Director Ha confirmed they held 4%. The grandfather didn't hesitate. He ordered Director Ha to give all of it to Mahyuk. He made sure to add that since it was a gift, the taxes needed to be paid properly to avoid any trouble. Mahyuk's eyes widened. Dahyun. At that time, Dahyun was the undisputed #1 company in the entire country. But Mahyuk knew something his grandfather didn't. He knew that after the founder's death, the company would eventually break apart because of fighting between the heirs. This stock wasn't just about money, it was a key piece for his future plans. Mahyuk bowed and thanked his grandfather. He knew that getting shares in a company like Dahyun was almost impossible, even for people with a lot of money. He'd honestly expected to walk away with just a little spending money. Turns out, this was a much bigger gift than he could have hoped for. Just then, a voice called out from the entrance. Someone else had arrived. Mahyuk's eyes shot open. He knew that voice. It was his uncles, Chin Sodman and Chin Sodhin. One of them gave a greasy smile, looking down on him. He stared right back at them. These were the exact people he'd been waiting to see. The ones who had murdered him. He stared at them, his mind racing. He needed to know which one of them had sent the order to have him taken out. His grandfather's voice cut through the tension. He told Mahyuk to greet them since they were his uncles. Mahyuk knew they were the most likely suspects, but he couldn't be certain. For now, he decided he had to stay off their radar. So he bowed and introduced himself. One of the uncles immediately made a comment about him growing up in difficult circumstances with just his grandmother. He put a hand on Mahyuk's shoulder, offering to help with anything he needed. After all, he said they were family. Later, the conversation moved to the grandfather's study. The grandfather turned his attention to the woman in the room. He asked if her mother-in-law's business was doing well, mentioning rumors that the Samsung group was in a difficult spot. She just smiled and said everything was fine. She claimed the media was just making up stories and that her father-in-law had everything under control. The grandfather knew the man well. He called him ruthless, someone who didn't care about anything but results. Still, he told her to let them know he was there to help if they needed it. After all, they were family by marriage. The woman quietly agreed to pass on the message. Then he turned to another uncle and asked about his father-in-law, Mr. Kim. The man replied that he was doing well and was still active in politics. The grandfather's offer was more of a warning. He told his son to let Mr. Kim know he should come to him for money, not get into trouble with illegal funds. That's when his tone changed. He looked at all of them and asked a very pointed question, who had recently sent money to President Lee Haksu. He glared at them furious. He told them that wasn't how you use money. You make people come to you and beg for it, you don't ever give it to them first. One of the uncles tried to argue back, his voice shaky. He reminded his father that they knew who was backing the president and that breaking their promise would have consequences. The other uncle chimed in, looking terrified. He agreed that going back on their word now would be a huge mistake. The uncle finished his point, insisting that the group called Chingpeng wouldn't just let this go. The threat hung heavy in the air. The grandfather sat silently at the center of it all, listening to his sons argue. But Chen Tison didn't say a word. He just sat there, his face grim, letting their failure sink in. Sometime later, on a rainy night, a different meeting was taking place. The grandfather was sitting across from two other men. One of them was Mahyuk. The rain poured down on the large estate. Inside, the house was quiet. Mahyuk found himself standing in his mother's room. It was exactly the same as it was in his previous life. He reached for a familiar book on the shelf. He carefully opened it. Tucked inside was a photograph. It was a picture of his mother with her father. In his last life, this was the only photo he ever had of her. He remembered his grandfather leaving behind only this one picture. It was almost like he wanted the world to forget his mother ever existed. He stood there alone in the quiet room, holding the only piece of his past he had left. Suddenly, the door swung open. A man in a suit stood there, a smug grin on his face. He asked Mahyuk if he was Misuk's son. Mahyuk's expression hardened. He knew exactly who this was, Chin Jiwon. He was almost certain this was the man who had ordered his death in his past life. To Jiwon, he was just another rival for the family inheritance. Jiwon walked in, already trying to put him in his place. He mocked him for coming from the countryside, asking if it was hard to adjust. Mahyuk didn't even react to the insult. He just stared back at him and asked something. Jiwon kept pushing, acting surprised that Mahyuk wasn't being polite. He insulted him, asking if people from the countryside didn't know how to show respect. But Mahyuk wasn't fazed. He thought about how childish Jiwon was both in the past and now. He was just consistently pathetic. Instead of answering, Mahyuk just turned his back and walked over to a bookshelf, completely ignoring him. Then, without any warning, he spun around and grabbed Jiwon by the shoulder. He looked him right in the eye and asked why he should show respect to someone who was being rude from the moment they met. Jiwon was completely speechless. He couldn't believe what was happening. Mahyuk knew this was probably the first time anyone had ever stood up to Jiwon like this. After all, his father was the eldest son of the Lone Shark King, and his mother was the daughter of the chairman of the Samsung Group. With a background like that, no one had ever dared to treat him with anything but respect. Jiwon completely lost it. He screamed at Mahyuk, furious that some nobody would dare to act so arrogantly in front of him. He tried to compose himself, waving a hand dismissively. He told Mahyuk that this wasn't a place for someone like him. Then he tried to buy him off. He offered Mahyuk 100 million to just disappear, saying it was enough to live like a king in Busan. Mahyuk's mind flashed back. Jiwon had said the exact same thing in his past life. Back then, he just stood there like an idiot, unable to say a word. But this time was different. A grin spread across Mahyuk's face as he sarcastically praised Jiwon's generosity, asking if he was offering his little brother some pocket money. He laughed it off, saying 100 million was just pocket change, barely enough to buy a plate of fish at the market. Jiwon's face went cold. He resorted to a low blow, insulting Mahyuk for not having parents. He sneered that he could only imagine what kind of state the old woman who raised him was. That was the last straw. The next thing Jiwon knew, a hand cracked across his face. Jiwon slammed against the door so hard that the wood cracked under his fist. He was completely stunned. Mahyuk leaned in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He asked if Jiwon really wanted to get beaten up by a poor kid from the countryside who never learned anything. Jiwon was sweating, his voice shaking. He tried to threaten Mahyuk, reminding him that he was the eldest son of the Chin family and wouldn't get away with this. He desperately said he was going to tell his grandfather right away. Mahyuk just told him to get a grip. That's when Mahyuk's tone changed. He started listing off Jiwon's secrets, casually mentioning his drug habit and a smuggling operation that was about to hit the news. Jiwon's face went pale. He stammered, asking what on earth Mahyuk was talking about. Mahyuk just smiled. He offered to share more stories, like the one about a drug party at a hotel that ended with a girl being sent to the hospital. Jiwon was completely terrified. He couldn't understand how this kid could possibly know any of that. Jiwon tried to act tough, threatening to go tell their grandfather everything right now. He dared Mahyuk to come with him. But Mahyuk knew all about the trouble Jiwon had caused in his past life. And the worst part was, what had happened so far was nothing compared to what was coming. Mahyuk pushed him back, his expression cold. He told Jiwon that if he wanted to be treated like a big brother, he needed to start acting like one. Jiwon was speechless, his face twisted with anger and shame. Mahyuk sat down on his bed, completely done with the conversation. He calmly asked Jiwon to leave, saying he was tired. Jiwon stopped at the door and looked back, his voice low and serious. He warned Mahyuk to never speak of those things again, making it clear that if he did, one of them wouldn't survive. Mahyuk looked up, his eyes sharp. He asked if that was a request or a threat. Jiwon's confidence completely shattered. He stammered that it was just a request. Jiwon quickly promised to keep his mouth shut, just wanting to get out of there as fast as possible. Without another word, he turned and left the room. The door slammed shut behind him. As Mahyuk watched him go, he wondered if Chin Jiwon was really the one who had taken him down in his past life. He found it hard to believe someone so pathetic could have been responsible. Sometime later, Mahyuk prepared to leave the massive estate. He walked down the grand staircase, his thoughts still heavy. On his way out, he saw his grandfather waiting for him. The old man asked if he was leaving now. Mahyuk bowed deeply and confirmed that he was taking his leave. Promised to visit him often. Mahyuk bowed one last time before heading out. The old man stood alone, looking out the window. The massive room seemed to swallow him whole, highlighting just how alone he was. Sometime later, back in the city, Mahyuk was met by one of his grandfather's men. The man handed him an envelope, telling him it was 1,000,000 won. He explained it was a gift from the chairman, who felt that just giving him stocks wasn't enough. Then he told him the password. It was the anniversary of Mahyuk's mother's death. Mahyuk was surprised by how carefully his grandfather handled things. He asked the man to pass along his thanks, but the man told him to call his grandfather himself, saying he would be waiting for the call. Time passed and Mahyuk became a second-year student. He ended up in a different class from his friends, but they were all still working hard, either studying or focusing on their clubs. They were all doing their best, trying to keep their promise to go to a university in Seoul. But then, a new guy arrived. The arrival of this new person would change things. The teacher walked into the classroom, followed by a new student. He introduced him to the class, explaining that he was a transfer student from Seoul. The new student just smiled, looking completely at ease. He told the class his name was Hong Jimpyo and that he was from Seoul. But Mahyuk could tell just by looking at him. This guy was a whole different kind of crazy. Turns out Hong Jimpyo didn't waste any time. He immediately gathered a group of followers around him. He sat with them like a king, completely at ease, as if he'd been running the school for years. Then he got straight to the point. He asked his new crew who the real head of the school was. One of the students explained that there wasn't a formal boss, but he said the closest person to one was a guy named Kim Mahyuk. He confirmed Mahyuk was a sophomore just like them, and that he was definitely the strongest one around. To prove his point, he told Jimpyo a story from last year. Some seniors had tried to call Mahyuk out, but he just ignored them and kept sleeping at his desk. Finally, one of the seniors lost his temper. He walked up and slammed his hand on Mahyuk's head, screaming at him to wake up. But that was a big mistake. Before the senior could even pull his hand back, Mahyuk's arm shot up and grabbed his wrist. Mahyuk didn't even flinch. He just looked at the senior with cold, empty eyes. The senior's shock turned to pain as he was thrown across the room, slamming into the ground. He had taken down the entire group without even breaking a sweat. With the classroom in chaos, he calmly went back to his desk, put his head down, and told them he was going back to sleep. The student finished his story, explaining that nobody dared to touch Mahyuk after that. But now he said Mahyuk just lives a quiet life to focus on his studies. Hong Jimpyo just smiled. He thought that sounded arrogant and said that messing with guys like that was the most fun. His followers looked worried. One of them begged Jimpyo not to start a fight for no reason, insisting that Mahyuk was on a completely different level. But Jimpyo just laughed it off. He told them that being good at fighting doesn't mean you always win. He then reminded them that they weren't following him because he lost, were they? Jimpyo leaned in, a smug look on his face. He reminded them that his power came from his father, the chief prosecutor. Then he asked about Mahyuk's family, trying to find a weakness. One of his followers answered. He explained that Mahyuk doesn't have parents and just lives with his grandmother. He mentioned a grandfather, but no one knew anything about him. A slow, nasty smile spread across Jimpyo's face, so Mahyuk didn't even have parents. This was exactly the kind of leverage he was looking for. Meanwhile, two of Mahyuk's friends were sitting outside the school. They were talking about their friend Hyunsung, who was busy at the sports club again. One of them explained that Hyunsung was determined to get into a physical education college and was even following a strict diet. The other friend laughed, joking that he was finally starting to grow up. Then the conversation changed. The friend asked if he'd heard about that new transfer student Hong Jimpyo. He complained about the guy, finding him really annoying. The other friend's expression turned serious. He said that he remembered him. He recalled exactly who he was, the son of the chief prosecutor who had transferred from Seoul. He remembered hearing that Jimpyo was using his father's influence to run the school however he pleased. He explained that with the seniors away on an outing, Jimpyo had created his own circle. He was even getting freshmen to act like gangsters, turning the school into his personal playground. Just then, one of them looked up. A group of students was walking across the yard. It was Mahyuk and his friends, walking together like they owned the place. Mahyuk had a small knowing smile on his face, but his friend Lee Myung-soo looked much more serious. The friend turned to Myung-soo with a serious look. He warned him to never get involved with Jimpyo, joking about why his friend was so concerned, asking why he was worrying for no reason. But his friend insisted, telling him he was being serious. Myung-soo just brushed it off, joking about why his friend was so concerned. Meanwhile, Mahyuk and his friends just kept walking, completely unaware of the trouble that was brewing. Mahyuk's eyes narrowed. He knew exactly what kind of person he was dealing with. Later, while Mahyuk was studying, the classroom door flew open. A friend ran in, completely panicked, shouting that something terrible had happened to Myung-soo. He said Myung-soo got into a fight, and his leg was so badly hurt he might never use it again. It was all because of the transfer student Hong Jimpyo, but since his father was the chief prosecutor, he wasn't even being questioned. The news hit Manhwa like a punch. He remembered back in his first life, he didn't want to get involved in anything annoying. Because of that, he'd ignored his closest friend Musu when he was in trouble. But this time was going to be different. He made a silent promise that he wouldn't give up on anyone precious to him, no matter who he had to face. And this is how it all started. Musu was just sitting at his desk, minding his own business and trying to study. That's when someone walked up and called his name. Musu looked up and the trouble began. Hong Jimpyo and his new friends walked right up to Musu's desk. He got straight to the point, asking if it was true that his friend Manhwa was really as good at fighting as everyone said. Musu tried to shut it down. He told Jimpyo not to worry about it, explaining that Manhwa only cared about studying now. A sly grin spread across Jimpyo's face. He asked if that meant Manhwa would have no problem with him taking over the school. Musu just wanted him to go away. He told Jimpyo to do whatever he wanted, insisting that Manhwa had nothing to do with any of it. But that's when Jimpyo's real reason came out. He admitted that Manhwa's reputation really pissed him off. Musu was furious. He demanded to know why Jimpyo was bothering someone who was just trying to study and stay out of trouble. Jimpyo just kept smiling, clearly enjoying the whole thing. He admitted that he absolutely hated it when people thought someone else was better than him. He looked around and complained that everyone in the class seemed more scared of Manhwa than of him. Musu had heard enough. He told Jimpyo to just leave Manhwa alone. That set off one of Jimpyo's guys. He got right in Musu's face, yelling that without Manhwa he was nothing. But before the guy could swing, Jimpyo calmly put a hand out and stopped him. He leaned in close, that same cold smile on his face. He explained that he always gets what he wants, and he always crushes whatever stands in his way. Musu was furious. He couldn't believe this guy was for real. Without warning, one of Jimpyo's guys slammed Musu's head straight into the desk. Jimpyo held his head down, smiling. He told Musu not to take it personally. This was only happening because he was friends with Manhwa. Then with a casual look over his shoulder, he ordered his guys to drag Musu out. Meanwhile, Manhwa was just sitting in the classroom, trying to focus on his studies. Suddenly, one of his classmates ran in, shouting his name. He told Manhwa that there was a big problem. He explained that Musu had been taken by Hong Jimpyo. They wanted Manhwa to come to the band room in the annex. He knew this would happen, no matter how hard he tried to avoid trouble. What was meant to happen was going to happen anyway. Another one of his friends, Hyun-sung, caught up to him. He was furious, demanding to know what was going on with Musu. Manhwa stopped him, telling him to stay back and that he'd take care of it himself. But Hyun-sung wasn't having it. He yelled back, refusing to stay still while their friend was in trouble. Manhwa knew he had to stop him. Hyun-sung had trained for a year to become a top judo talent in the city. If he got caught up in a school fight, he could lose everything he'd worked for. He grabbed Hyun-sung and told him to calm down, reminding him that getting involved would have a huge impact on his college admission. But Hyun-sung wasn't listening to reason. He yelled back, asking if he should really be worried about college at a time like this. He swore that if anything happened to Musu, he would personally take down Jimpyo and anyone else involved. Manhwa shouted his full name, trying to get through to him. He looked him straight in the eyes and reminded him of what they'd talked about before. He had big plans for the future, and he needed both Hyun-sung and Musu by his side. So he told him to let him take care of this alone. That finally got through. Hyun-sung looked at him, his anger fading. With that settled, Manhwa grabbed a nearby broom and snapped the head off, leaving him with a solid wooden stick. He was ready. He handed the guarding job to Hyun-sung. He told him not to let anyone through, no matter who it was. Hyun-sung was worried. He asked if Manhwa was really going to do this all by himself. Manhwa just smiled back. He asked if Hyun-sung had forgotten who he was. He declared his name out loud, ready to remind everyone what it meant. He walked through the door, ready for whatever was on the other side. Inside, the room was filled with Jimpyo's crew. They had Musu on the floor, forced into a bow, while Jimpyo sat in a chair like a king. Jimpyo didn't seem surprised at all. He just sounded amused, saying the rumors about Manhwa must be true. With a twisted grin, he admitted he'd done all of this for a simple reason. He just thought it would be fun. Manhwa's hand tightened into a fist. That one word pushed him over the edge. He walked forward calmly. He told Jimpyo to send Musu out and deal with him instead, promising to make things much more interesting. Jimpyo just smirked. He mocked Manhwa's dramatic entrance, asking if he thought he was in some kind of movie. With a wave of his hand, he gave the signal to his guys. But none of them moved. They were sweating, clearly terrified of facing Manhwa. Jimpyo shot up from his chair, furious. He screamed at them, reminding everyone that his father was a prosecutor. He promised that if Manhwa even touched them, he'd use his father's power to lock him up for life. He told them not to worry about a thing. That was all the encouragement they needed. The crew grabbed whatever they could find and surrounded Manhwa. With a final shout, Jimpyo ordered them to attack. The first guy came at him, swinging a heavy pipe right at his head. But before it could land, Manhwa shot his hand up and jammed the end of the pipe straight into the guy's throat. The thug dropped to his knees, coughing and gagging. Just like that, the first one was down. The others didn't hesitate. Two more guys rushed forward with bats, screaming at him. Manhwa calmly raised a wooden bat he'd picked up, blocking the first swing perfectly. He moved through their attacks like it was nothing, dodging and weaving between their clumsy swings. He saw an opening and sent a hard kick straight into one guy's face, taking him out of the fight. Another one tried to sneak up on him, but Manhwa was already turning, landing a solid punch that sent him stumbling back. He used the long pole to block another bat, the impact echoing through the room. The thug went down hard, his weapon clattering across the floor. He stood ready, daring the rest of them to even try. The fight was over in a flash. Jinpyo could only stare, his tough guy act completely falling apart. In just a few moments, every single one of them was on the floor. He looked over the mess, not even breathing hard. But it wasn't over. Jinpyo grabbed the injured Myungsu, pressing a knife to his throat. He screamed at Manhwa to stay back, threatening to hurt his friend if he took another step. Manhwa didn't even hesitate. He closed the distance in an instant. Before Jinpyo could even react, Manhwa grabbed him and slammed him headfirst into the floor. Jinpyo hit the ground hard, completely stunned. He was left on the floor, groaning in pain with a brutal nose. Even on the ground, Jinpyo started screaming. He threatened Manhwa, yelling that his dad was the chief prosecutor and he wouldn't get away with this. He tried to make Manhwa understand, shouting that a chief prosecutor could lock him in prison for life. Manhwa just grabbed him by the collar. He asked what good a prosecutor was when fists were closer than the law. Then he landed a hard punch, telling him it was for hurting his friend Myungsu. He hit him again, this time for interrupting his studies. But he wasn't done. He grabbed Jinpyo's leg. His expression was ice cold. This last part was for what they did to Myungsu's ankle. The color drained from Jinpyo's face. He started begging, pleading for him to stop. Manhwa didn't even hesitate.